June 28, 1971. Washington, D.C., 11:47. A black limousine pulls up to a side entrance of the White House, away from the press, away from the public eye, away from anyone who might ask questions. The door opens, and Muhammad Ali steps out, wearing a tailored suit but no tie, his face showing the exhaustion of a man who's been fighting battles outside the ring for 4 years. He's not here for a ceremony. He's not here for a photo opportunity. He's here because President Richard Nixon summoned him for a meeting that officially never happened, that appears in no visitor logs, that would remain buried in classified files for decades. As Ali walks through the dimly lit corridor, a Secret Service agent leads him to a private room where Nixon is waiting. The president stands, extends his hand, and says something that shocks Ali to his core. "Mr. Clay, we need to make a deal. Your country needs you to fight again, and I need you to stay out of prison." Muhammad Ali had been stripped of his heavyweight title, banned from boxing for 3.5 years, convicted of draft evasion, and was facing 5 years in federal prison. His appeals had run out. His career was destroyed. His freedom hung by a thread. But in this room, on this night, a conversation would take place that would change everything. A deal would be offered, a choice would be made, and the truth of what happened would be buried for 50 years. This is the story of Muhammad Ali's secret White House meeting with Richard Nixon. The deal they made, the price Ali paid, and why the government tried to erase all evidence it ever happened. To understand how Muhammad Ali ended up in a secret White House meeting, you have to go back to April 28, 1967, the day he refused to step forward. Ali was 25 years old, heavyweight champion of the world, the most famous athlete on the planet. He defeated Sonny Liston, Floyd Patterson, and every challenger put in front of him. He was beautiful, charismatic, unbeatable. The world was his. Then came Vietnam. The U.S. military draft was pulling hundreds of thousands of young men into a war that was becoming increasingly unpopular, especially in black communities, who saw themselves dying in disproportionate numbers for a country that denied them basic civil rights at home. When Ali's draft notice arrived, he could have taken the easy path. The military offered him a sweetheart deal, no combat duty, just exhibition boxing matches and public relations appearances. Joe Louis had done it in World War II. Other athletes had done it. All Ali had to do was put on the uniform, smile for the cameras, and his career would continue uninterrupted. But Muhammad Ali didn't take the easy path. He never had. On April 28, 1967, at the Armed Forces Examining and Entrance Station in Houston, Texas, Ali stood in a room with 25 other young men. An officer called names alphabetically. When he reached Cassius Marcellus Clay, Ali's birth name, which he'd legally changed after converting to Islam, Ali refused to step forward. 3 times, they called his name. 3 times. Ali remained still, his face calm but determined. The room was silent, except for the officer's increasingly frustrated voice. "Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay. Cassius Clay." Finally, Ali spoke, his voice clear and steady. "That's not my name. My name is Muhammad Ali, and I will not step forward. I will not take part in this war." The consequences were immediate and devastating. Within hours, the New York State Athletic Commission suspended Ali's boxing license. The World Boxing Association stripped him of his heavyweight title. Every state boxing commission in America followed suit, making it illegal for Ali to fight anywhere in the country. But the legal consequences were even worse. Ali was arrested, charged with draft evasion, and put on trial. The case was a foregone conclusion. On June 20, 1967, an all-white jury in Houston deliberated for just 21 minutes before finding Ali guilty. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in federal prison and a $10,000 fine, the maximum penalty. Ali remained free on bail, while his attorneys appealed, but his career was over. He was 25 years old, in his absolute prime, and he couldn't fight, couldn't earn money, couldn't do the only thing he'd trained his entire life to do. The years that followed were brutal. Ali was banned from leaving the country, so international fights were impossible. He was broke, lawyers ate up his savings, His third wife divorced him. Creditors came after everything he owned. He gave speeches on college campuses for a few $1,000s, trying to survive, watching younger fighters take the spotlight he'd once owned. But worse than the financial ruin was the public opinion. The media savaged him. Sports writers who'd once praised his boxing genius now called him a coward, a traitor, a disgrace. Politicians used him as a punching bag, a symbol of everything wrong with America's rebellious youth. Death threats arrived daily. The FBI opened a file on him, monitoring his every move, looking for any excuse to lock him up. And through it all, Ali never backed down. He gave interview after interview explaining his position. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. No Viet Cong ever called me nigger. Why should I go fight people in their own country when my own people are being attacked here? I'm not going to help murder innocent people for nothing." His words were prophetic, ahead of their time. Within a few years, the majority of Americans would turn against the Vietnam War, would recognize it as a tragic mistake. But in 1967, 1968, 1969, Ali was vilified, hated, destroyed. By 1970, public opinion began to shift. The war was going badly. The draft was increasingly unpopular. Ali's appeals were working their way through the courts, and there was a chance, a slim chance, that the Supreme Court might overturn his conviction. That's when things got interesting, because powerful people started to see Ali not as a threat, but as an opportunity. Richard Nixon became president in January 1969, promising to end the Vietnam War while maintaining American strength and honor. But by 1971, the war was still raging. Protests were tearing the country apart, and Nixon was looking for any advantage he could find. That's when someone in the Nixon administration had an idea. What if Muhammad Ali could be convinced to support the war effort, or at least to stop publicly opposing it? Think about the propaganda value. The most famous black athlete in the world, the man who'd become a hero to the anti-war movement, suddenly changing his position? It would be a massive coup, undermining the credibility of war protesters and giving Nixon's policies a legitimacy they desperately needed. But how do you convince Muhammad Ali to abandon his principles? The same principles he'd sacrificed everything for? The answer: you make him an offer he can't refuse. In June 1971, Ali's legal situation was reaching a critical point. His case was scheduled to go before the Supreme Court, but the outcome was uncertain. If he lost, he'd go to prison, 5 years in a federal penitentiary. His career would be over. He'd be in his 30s when he got out, far too old to return to boxing at championship level. But if he won the Supreme Court case, he'd be free. His conviction would be overturned. He could get his boxing license back, fight again, reclaim his title, restore his legacy. Someone in Nixon's inner circle. Historians still debate who, as the meeting was kept so secret, reached out to Ali's representatives with a message. The president wants to talk, off the record. No press, no witnesses, just a conversation between two men who might be able to help each other. Ali's initial reaction was skepticism, bordering on anger. Nixon represented everything Ali opposed: the war, the establishment, the system that had tried to destroy him. Why would he meet with Nixon? But Ali's legal team convinced him to at least hear what Nixon had to say. "You don't have to agree to anything," they told him. "Just listen. If you don't like what he says, you walk out." So on June 28, 1971, the secret meeting was arranged. No official record, no visitor log entry, no photographs, just Ali, Nixon, and a few trusted aides, who would later be ordered to forget the meeting ever happened. The exact details of that conversation are still debated because there's no official transcript. But based on later interviews with people close to both men, and documents that were declassified decades later, we can piece together what happened in that room. Nixon started with flattery. He told Ali he was the greatest boxer who ever lived, that his exile from the sport was a tragedy, that America had lost something when Ali was forced out of the ring. "You're a national treasure, Muhammad," Nixon reportedly said, using Ali's chosen name, a calculated gesture of respect. "And this country needs you back where you belong." Ali listened. saying little, his face unreadable. Then Nixon got to the point. Your case is going to the Supreme Court next month. The justices are divided. It could go either way, but I have influence. Certain justices value my opinion on matters of national security. Ali's attorney, who was present in the room, later claimed this was the moment they realized what was being offered. Nixon was suggesting he could influence the Supreme Court decision. If you were to make a statement, Nixon continued, supporting the troops, expressing confidence in American military leadership, explaining that while you have religious objections to personally fighting, you respect those who serve, well, that would go a long way toward demonstrating your patriotism. And patriotic young men don't belong in prison. It was stunning, brazen, possibly illegal. Nixon was essentially offering to fix a Supreme Court case in exchange for Ali's public support of the war. Ali asked the obvious question. And if I don't make this statement? Nixon's smile disappeared. Then I can't help you. And honestly, Muhammad, I think the court is leaning toward upholding your conviction. You could be in prison by September. The room fell silent. Ali looked at his attorney, who gave a barely perceptible shake of his head, a warning not to agree to anything without discussing it first. But Nixon wasn't finished. There's more. Even if you win your case, you still can't fight. State boxing commissions won't license you. Promoters won't touch you. You'll be a free man, but you'll never fight again. However, Nixon leaned forward. If you and I come to an understanding, I can make phone calls. Georgia just legalized boxing after a 40-year ban. They're looking for a big fight to put them on the map. Atlanta could give you a license. We could arrange a fight against Jerry Quarry or one of the other top contenders. Get you back in the ring before the end of the year. Ali's eyes widened slightly. This was everything he'd wanted for 3.5 years. The chance to fight again, to prove he was still the greatest, to reclaim what had been stolen from him. All you have to do, Nixon said quietly, is support your country, support your president, show America that Muhammad Ali is a patriot, not a traitor. The meeting ended without Ali agreeing to anything. He left the White House the same way he'd entered, through a side door, under cover of darkness, unseen by the press or public. But 3 days later, something interesting happened. On July 2nd, 1971, Muhammad Ali gave an interview to a small newspaper where he made statements that shocked everyone who knew him. I have great respect for the men serving in Vietnam, Ali said. While my religious beliefs prevent me from personally participating in warfare, I recognize that others feel called to serve their country, and I honor their sacrifice. It was carefully worded, technically not an endorsement of the war itself, but close enough to what Nixon wanted. The interview was picked up by wire services and appeared in newspapers across America. Conservative media praised Ali's maturity and patriotism. Liberal supporters felt betrayed. 2 weeks later, the Georgia Athletic Commission announced that Muhammad Ali would be granted a boxing license, the first state to do so since his ban began. A fight was scheduled for October 26, 1971, against Jerry Quarry in Atlanta, and on June 28, 1971, exactly 1 month after Ali's secret White House meeting, the Supreme Court overturned his draft evasion conviction in an 8-0 decision. Technically, the justices ruled on a narrow legal technicality about how his conscientious objector status had been handled, but the timing was remarkable. Ali was free. He could fight again. Everything Nixon had promised had come true, but had Nixon actually influenced the Supreme Court? Or was it just a coincidence? We'll never know for certain, but the timing raised eyebrows among legal scholars and historians. The speed of the decision, the unanimous verdict, the narrow technical grounds, it all seemed convenient. What we do know is that Ali never made another anti-war statement after that White House meeting. He never marched in protests again. He stopped giving speeches critical of American foreign policy. He became, if not pro-war, at least silent on the subject. His fight against Jerry Quarry was a triumphant return. Ali won by TKO in the 3rd round, proving he could still compete at the highest level despite 3.5 years of inactivity. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. Sports writers who'd called him a coward now praised his courage and skill. 3 months later, Ali fought Oscar Bonavena in New York. His first fight in Madison Square Garden since the ban. Another victory. Another step toward reclaiming his throne. And then, on March 8, 1971, Ali got the fight he'd been dreaming about. A chance to fight Joe Frazier for the heavyweight championship at Madison Square Garden. The fight of the century. The biggest sporting event in decades. A chance to prove he was still the greatest. Ali lost. Frazier won by unanimous decision, handing Ali the first professional defeat of his career. It was devastating. Ali had come back from exile, only to lose the most important fight of his life. But here's the thing. Ali was 30 years old and had just fought 15 rounds against the world champion after 3.5 years of inactivity. That he was even competitive was remarkable, and the loss motivated him to train harder, fight smarter, and eventually reclaim the title. Over the next few years, Ali would beat Frazier in a rematch, defeat George Foreman in the legendary Rumble in the Jungle, and dominate the heavyweight division throughout the 1970s. He became more than a champion. He became an icon, a global symbol of courage, resilience, and excellence. But questions about that secret White House meeting lingered. In the 1980s and 1990s, as documents from the Nixon administration were slowly declassified, researchers discovered mentions of informal discussions with prominent African American figures and outreach to anti-war leaders, but specific details remained classified. Ali himself never publicly discussed the meeting. When journalists asked if he'd ever met with Nixon, Ali would deflect or give vague answers. "I met lots of presidents," he'd say with a smile. "Can't remember every conversation." His attorney, who was present at the meeting, signed a non-disclosure agreement and never spoke publicly about what happened in that room. Other aides who had knowledge of the meeting died without revealing details. It wasn't until 2015, after Ali had developed severe Parkinson's disease and could no longer communicate clearly, that some documents were finally declassified. A memo from Nixon's chief of staff referenced productive meeting with MC Muhammad Clay and noted subject receptive to arrangement regarding Georgia licensing and potential judicial outcome. Historians interpret this as confirmation that the meeting happened and that some kind of deal was discussed. But the specifics, exactly what was promised, what was delivered, whether Nixon actually influenced the Supreme Court, remain unknown. So did Muhammad Ali sell out? Did he abandon his principles in exchange for his freedom and career? The question is more complicated than it seems. On one hand, Ali did exactly what he'd refused to do in 1967. He made a statement that could be interpreted as supporting the war effort. He stopped publicly criticizing American foreign policy. He took a deal with the same government that had tried to imprison him. On the other hand, Ali never actually said the war was justified. He never encouraged young men to enlist. He never appeared at military rallies or posed for propaganda photos. His statement was carefully crafted to respect soldiers while not endorsing the war itself. And let's be honest about the alternative. Ali faced 5 years in federal prison during his athletic prime. His career would have been over. His children would have grown up without a father. His legacy would have been destroyed. For what? To prove a point? To maintain ideological purity? Sometimes courage isn't refusing to compromise. Sometimes courage is knowing when to make a strategic retreat so you can live to fight another day. Because here's what happened after Ali returned to boxing. He used his platform to speak out on issues of racial justice, economic inequality, and human rights around the world. He became a global ambassador for peace and understanding. He raised hundreds of millions for charity. He inspired generations of athletes to use their fame for social good. Would any of that have been possible if he'd spent 5 years in prison? If he'd been broken, bankrupt, and forgotten by the time he got out? The Nixon administration thought they'd bought Ali's silence, that they'd neutralized the threat and turned him into a compliant celebrity. But they were wrong. Ali never stopped fighting. He just chose his battles more carefully. He learned that sometimes you have to work within the system to change the system. That moral victories are meaningless if you don't survive to continue the fight. In 1974, Ali went to Zaire to fight George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle. The fight was more than a boxing match. It was a cultural event, a celebration of black excellence, a reclaiming of African heritage. Ali didn't need to give anti-war speeches to make a statement. His very existence, his success, his refusal to be destroyed, that was the statement. When Ali knocked out Foreman in the 8th round, reclaiming the heavyweight championship 7 years after it had been stripped from him, he proved something NIXON never understood. You can take away a man's title, his license, his freedom, but you can't take away who he is. Muhammad Ali remained Muhammad Ali. The government tried to break him. The media tried to destroy him. The boxing establishment tried to erase him. And he survived all of it, came back stronger, and became the most beloved athlete in the world. That White House meeting, that compromise, it bought Ali his freedom and his career, but it didn't change who he was or what he believed in. Muhammad Ali died on June 3, 2016, at age 74, after a long battle with Parkinson's disease. His funeral was attended by world leaders, celebrities, and thousands of ordinary people whose lives he'd touched. People spoke about his courage, his principles, his willingness to sacrifice everything for what he believed in, but they rarely mentioned the White House meeting, the compromise, the deal with Nixon, because that's not the story we want to tell about heroes. We want them to be pure, unbending, willing to destroy themselves rather than compromise. We want martyrs, not pragmatists. But real heroes are more complicated. Real heroes face impossible choices and make difficult decisions. Real heroes survive. The truth is, Muhammad Ali made a deal with Richard Nixon in 1971. He softened his anti-war stance in exchange for his freedom and career. And you know what? That's okay. Because the alternative, Ali in prison, his career destroyed, his legacy tarnished, his voice silenced, wouldn't have served anyone. The anti-war movement didn't need another martyr. They needed a survivor who could continue the fight in different ways. And that's what Ali did. For the next 45 years, he fought, not always in the ring, not always in ways that made headlines, but he fought for justice, for dignity, for the belief that one person can make a difference. The White House meeting was a moment of compromise in a life of principle. It was a tactical retreat in a strategic war. It was the price Ali paid to live another day and continue fighting. Richard Nixon thought he'd won, thought he'd bought Ali's silence, thought he'd turned a dangerous radical into a harmless celebrity, but Ali won. He got his career back. He reclaimed his title. He became more famous, more beloved, more influential than Nixon ever was. And when Nixon resigned in disgrace in 1974, fleeing the White House in a helicopter to avoid impeachment, Muhammad Ali was the heavyweight champion of the world, standing in the ring in Zaire, having just knocked out George Foreman, the crowd chanting his name. Who won that deal? Who really won? The answer is obvious. Muhammad Ali was the greatest boxer who ever lived. But more than that, he was the greatest at surviving, adapting, and ultimately winning, even when the game was rigged against him. That White House meeting didn't break him. It didn't buy him. It didn't change him. It was just another fight. And like every other fight in his life, Muhammad Ali won. If this story made you think about courage, compromise, and the complicated reality of fighting for justice, subscribe to Hidden Legend Stories. Leave a comment. Did Muhammad Ali sell out by meeting with Nixon, or was it a smart strategic move? What would you have done in his situation? Next time, we'll explore another legend who faced impossible choices and had to decide between principle and survival. Until then, remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is live to fight another day. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, but most importantly, survive.